killed in various forms of incarceration during Hitler's reign in Germany. Of the 11 million, approximately 6 million were Jews. But the Holocaust was a singularly Jewish experience because only the Jews were destined to die just by the accident of their birth. They didn't have to do absolutely anything. The third thing that I like to point out, which is also obvious, I'm only the next best thing, because those who suffered most are not here to tell you about it because they didn't make it. I was born in Romania. My nationality, my native language is Hungarian. It's the part that probably known to most of you as Transylvania, which used to be Austria-Hungary prior to the end of Second World War, before quite a few years before I was born. And then it became Romania after Second World War, and in the 40s it was Hungary again. My childhood, I would say, was privileged mainly because I was an only child. And you know, if you're an only child, your parents give you everything they're able to give you, and they probably give you more than they're able to give you. So I had a very happy, really very, very wonderful childhood. I was the center of my parents' universe, and I didn't want for anything. My hometown used to be in that part of the world, a medium-sized community with about 70,000 population. I was very much part of an entire community, not just a Jewish community. I went 1 year elementary school to a Jewish community school, 4 years middle school, junior high school to an all-girl, very strict Catholic convent school, 1 year to a Protestant school, and then public school the rest. And my parents definitely always told me that you look at each person for whatever that person stands for, regardless of religion, social status, or what have you. I did not suffer any kind of discrimination or persecution in my early childhood, but in little subtle ways you heard day in and day out that if you're Jewish, you're just not as good as the next person, that if you're Jewish, you're sort of a second-class citizen. And it was hard because you looked in the mirror and you didn't look different from the rest of the world. But somehow you started to believe it, and you had this feeling that why did this thing had to happen to me? Why can't I just be like everybody else? And this is one of the worst things that can happen to a young person, because they do manage to take away the pride in your background, in your heritage. And that really should not happen to any of us. We should all be able to be proud from whatever background we came from. But this was not an everyday occurrence, and I wouldn't really say it changed my everyday life very often. Nothing bad happened to me until September of 1940, when Second World War was already a year old. Hitler was in power in Germany for about 7.5 years. And on September 5th of 1940, northern Transylvania, that my community was part of, was taken away by Hitler from Romania and given back to Hungary. Under normal circumstances, this could have been a happy occasion. After all, that was my language. My mother never even learned how to speak Romanian. But of course, at this point, there was no joy in it at all, because being Jewish overshadowed absolutely everything. So practically overnight, anti-Jewish laws came into effect that did not affect us up to that point at all. The one that immediately affected me, and at that time I thought it could be the biggest tragedy of my life, or almost the end of the world, was that Jewish children were not allowed to high schools. There was a maximum of 6% approved, 6 to every 100, and we only had 3 high schools in my small community. So there I was, just turned 14, ready to go to 9th grade, the beginning of high school. And all my life I was raised with how very important learning is. So as I said, I thought it could be the end of the world if I can't go to school anymore. Again, I was one of the lucky ones. I did get into a high school as one of 5 Jewish girls. It was not the high school of my choice, but it was a high school, so I could continue on going to school. Other anti-Jewish laws came into effect pretty quickly, but these were mainly of financial nature. because Jewish people all of a sudden were not able to work in many kinds of jobs, like Jewish teachers were not able to teach anymore except in Jewish community schools where they existed. Lawyers could not belong to the Bar Association. Uh, Businesses could not be owned by Jews. Of course, government jobs could not be had by Jews. So I'm sure that every Jewish family did have some money problems, but we were still in our homes. We still had food on our table. We still had clothes on our bed. And I'm sure not only in my family, because I happen to be an only child, but I'm sure all parents protected the children, even from the thought that everything is not as well today as it has been yesterday. So life went on. Very soon, Jewish people who managed to escape from Poland, Poland, as you know, being the first country occupied by the Nazis at the very beginning of Second World War, they stopped by at my parents' house and other Jewish homes asking for food or clothes or money. And eventually they started to tell us about ghettos. You all know what ghettos mean in this respect. Once you're in, you can get out gated. Uh, and later on about the early concentration camps. But these were the ones that were established in Germany proper in the later 30s, mainly for at the beginning for political prisoners. So we had absolutely no idea that the mass murder of the Jews started in Europe as early as late 1941. And it did not start in the death camps because those didn't exist yet. But as the Nazis were occupying the former Soviet Union, they would take an entire Jewish population of a community to the nearby fields where they would either make them dig their own mass graves, make them undress, line up by those graves, and just shoot them in the graves. Or in a case of a very famous locality, Babi Yar near Kiev in the Ukraine, where they had a ravine that they used for the same purpose. Only one day, late 1941, they killed 34 to 35,000 people just in that one location. Did we know about any of these or later on about the death camps? Absolutely not. No, we have a lot of very young people amongst us. People you don't remember time before the internet, never mind television, and we did not have those resources yet. But we certainly had newspapers and we had radios. But all these governments that were dictatorships, they controlled absolutely everything. So if they decided that no news should get out, no news did get out. In spite of the fact that if it was severely punishable by the law if you were caught, we did listen to the British radio as many times a day, as many times we could catch the news in as many languages as we could understand. But nothing was ever said about the existence of the death camps, and we do know now that the governments knew about, the Western governments knew about them as early 1942. So, as far as I was concerned, life went on as normal. We went to school every day, we went ice skating in the winter, we had a nice river, a nice beach by our river. We spent summer vacation days there. Traveling abroad for Jews was out of the question as of September 5th of 1940 because our passports were immediately taken away. One more reason for our total ignorance was that all these horrible inhumanities, all these atrocities that we do know now were committed by one of the most civilized nations in Western Europe, Germany. The Germans that gave the word scientists and philosophers, artists, writers, composers. Who would have ever imagined that a nation as civilized as that would commit those horrible atrocities that we do know now they committed? So life went on, and by early 1944, everybody was getting very optimistic. I'm not talking about us youngsters, but our parents and their peers. They were pretty hopeful that the war is going to end pretty soon. The allies, the Western allies plus Russia, they were winning the war on both fronts. And in their minds, it couldn't take longer than maybe a couple, 3 months. No physical harm came to us up to that point, and they were pretty hopeful that we are going to be liberated. You know, such is human nature that you never believe that whatever happened to your neighbor can happen to you, because you always believe that you are different from your neighbor. Believe me, if you let hatred rule the world, nobody is really safe in it. Well, on March 19th of 1944, all our dreams and all our optimism came to a sudden end, because on this day, the Nazi army physically occupied Hungary. Our streets were lined with German tanks, regular army, the SS, I'm sure the Gestapo, the German secret police amongst them. We were still walking to school. One of the first anti-Jewish laws that came into effect as of April 5th of 1944 was that every Jewish person over the age of 6 had to wear a yellow Star of David the minute we stepped out from the privacy of our homes. I hope when I'm done you will have some questions, but this is the only one that I'm going to anticipate, because somebody is always asking me, why did you have to do it? Why did you have to wear that star? You didn't look different from the rest of the population. Two reasons. Number one, in a small community like mine, a lot of people knew you. So you couldn't take a chance. You run into somebody who knows you're Jewish, they might report you to the authorities. The other was that if you were 14 or over, you had to carry this little ID card about the size of a driver's license that was issued by the police, and that contained religion. So just in case they would ID you on the street, they would find out you're Jewish. So we were walking to school with our yellow stars, proclaiming to the whole world our Jewishness. First time in my life I really experienced fear or panic, I would say, because at this point we knew we are at their mercy. They could have hit us, kick us, spit on us, shoot us for all that matter. It was too late for anybody to stand up and say, hey, you can get away with it. They also took 80 adult Jewish men as hostages. My father was one of them. Then they locked them up in a house that they evacuated. And every single day, the Gestapo, the German secret police, would walk in there and they would threaten the hostages that if any of their family members would try to hide or escape, they would shoot the hostage himself immediately. Through the Hungarian police, they made sure that we, the families, knew about this threat. So even if my mother would have entertained any kind of ideas about trying to hide or escape, of course we could not jeopardize my father's life. The ghetto in my hometown started on May the 3rd, 1944, on my 18th birthday, 2 days after I graduated high school. We graduated early. We were in an occupied country, and most of the public buildings were needed for one purpose or another. On that day, on May the 3rd of 1944, our rabbi Sunday school teacher came around and picked up the handful of Jewish kids who either graduated that year or maybe a year or two before, and he took us into this designated ghetto area and put us in charge to register everybody who was taken into the ghetto. It took about 2 weeks until everybody was in, because they were not only from my hometown, but all the surrounding smaller towns, villages, farms, what have you. My parents, and they did let the hostages go before our turn came to get into the ghetto. My parents and I got in among the last people, probably about mid-May, around mid-May of 1944. As soon as we were all in there, they started to take people away, starting May 19th, 3,000 at the time. We were told that we're going to be resettled in Germany, where we're going to work in factories, on the fields, wherever our labor is needed for the Nazi war economy. And they assured us that as long as we do what we are told to do, we are going to be treated well. And of course, we believed it, since we were dealing with this very civilized German nation. We